Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, murder on the streets of London. We'll examine the news coverage, the pictures used, and the words chosen. The Syrian government loses a foot soldier in the propaganda war. A correspondent killed by sniper fire. A self-described independent voice of Egyptian journalism goes out of business and out of print. And Fox News' not-so-secret weapon in the battle for ratings, female eye candy.
If that's the face of the right, I'll tell the left so long.
That's our web video of the week. It was one of those images that once you saw it, you just knew would be everywhere in news media around the world. A knife-wielding man, hands stained with blood, making a confession, saying he had committed murder on a London street in an act of revenge for Muslims killed abroad. The victim, a British soldier, was hacked to death. The confession was caught on a smartphone. The coverage of the Woolwich murder raised all kinds of troubling journalistic issues. There was the instant debate on the use of gruesome imagery. Some news outlets were called out on the dangers of providing someone of a violent ideology with the opportunity to effectively write his own headline. And then there was the use of the word terrorism. Did it really apply in this case? And if not, in whose interest was it that the term be used? Did the media give the story the coverage it deserved? Or was the coverage irresponsible? Our starting point this week is South London.
A man believed to be a British soldier was hacked to death by two attackers. One of the men was filmed in the immediate aftermath, his hands covered in blood.
You people will never be safe. Remove your governments, they don't care about you.
Most murders occur out of the public eye, and those who take a life tend to deny responsibility.
Get back! Get back!
Among the things that set this killing apart, beyond its sheer graphic brutality, was what happened next. The way the man walked towards and not away from the phone cameras.
It was utterly ghastly what happened physically, but then it was a media event in itself. It was first broadcast on social networks. It was witnesses there who were recording what happened and distributing that.
The coverage the following day, was it graphic? Yes. Was it sensational? Inevitably, because the material that was there was highly unusual. This was a murder story, and it was recorded by many people on phones because the suspected killers wanted coverage and encouraged people to take pictures of them.
This is a potential huge minefield for any in-house lawyer with a media organisation. It's a rolling news story. It is moving extremely quickly. Information is coming in from lots of people on the street, and a media lawyer has to make a very, very quick decision about a whole series of issues.
This was a major event, and the amount of coverage was justified. I think the question is the form that coverage takes. Is the coverage enabling the public to come to an informed picture of this event, or is the coverage actually being unhelpful?
It is ironic that the coverage may have helped the legal case of the man in the video. It is conceivable, say legal experts, that coverage could actually jeopardize the prospects for a fair jury trial and make it harder to prosecute the suspects.
Our contempt laws are archaic. The law is designed to deal with a simple situation of a newspaper which publishes an article shortly before a trial takes place. So there is certainly an opportunity now to think again about whether those laws are fit for purpose in a multimedia, social media age when there is a plethora of news outlets, and news is coming from all sorts of sources, including members of the public. And that makes it extremely difficult, one, to regulate, and two, for the media to be able to keep in line with our fairly archaic contempt laws.
The coverage of this story was driven by the images, which were accompanied by words. News outlets walked a fine line on how far to go with the pictures. And the decision made by one British paper, The Guardian, to turn one man's words into a screaming headline has been questioned.
The message was that you people will never be safe. They used his exact words. There was no judgment from the newspaper, and that was what it was criticised for. They just let the words speak for themselves, and most of the British newspapers used similar images, but some of the others used more judgmental and critical language rather than a direct quotation from the suspect themselves.
You could sort of question whether that was handing over, if you like, a megaphone to the perpetrators, but I don't think you should see headlines in isolation. And the critical thing was how the media were able to contextualise this. So if the context follows on from that shocking first image, then journalism has done its job, which is to get your attention, to make you confront brutal realities, but then get you to reflect and think about it with much better context.
It's the nature of terrorism to seek publicity. It's also the nature of the media to thrive on sensational acts of terrorism.
That it was terror-related.
So with the media and terrorism, you have this symbiotic relationship. It's more responsibility on the media to balance between the necessity of reporting the event itself and the narrative, the message that the terrorists are trying to communicate.
But was the Woolwich murder an act of terrorism? The definition of the word varies depending on which dictionary one consults, but terrorism is generally associated with violence against civilians. Lee Rigby was out of uniform when he was killed, but he was a soldier who spent 6 months in Afghanistan. And the man on the video did say, "The only reason we have killed this man today is because Muslims are dying daily by British soldiers, and this British soldier is one. It is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." So the term, terrorism, was its use justified?
Terrorism is a word that has many different meanings. It obviously depends where you stand. At one point, Nelson Mandela was described as a terrorist, famously. And I think in this particular case, I think it was an act of terror in the sense that the tactic of it, that it was seeking to create fear and division and reaction.
This issue is political Islam!
Way beyond the ghastly act in itself. The fact that it was committed against a serving member of the armed forces doesn't stop it being an act of terror against the wider population.
There is no justification for what this guy did, right? In his head there's this global war going on. The war on terror is based on the assumption that battlefields aren't restricted to specific places. And so in a way he's just simply taking the war on terror's own narrative and inverting it and saying, well, I'll just join the other side, right? And so the linkage between terrorism and foreign policy is right there in those kind of narratives. Bringing that out is incredibly important to making sense of what's going on here. It's a mirror image of the war on terror's own narrative.
One final comparative note. 2 days after the Woolwich murder, Britain's High Court ruled on another case, ordering inquests into the allegedly unlawful killing of Iraqis by British soldiers. The Listening Post compared the media coverage of the Woolwich and Iraq stories. We found more than 3,000 articles on the Woolwich murder. There were just 10 on the Iraq inquest. What happened in Woolwich occurred with cameras present. The Iraqi deaths did not. But as tragic as the murder of Lee Rigby was, as shocking as the pictures were, there was only one life lost. The number of Iraqis killed under dubious circumstances is 161. Britain's High Court deemed those cases worthy of its attention. The British media, for the most part, and for whatever reason, did not. Our Global Village voice is now on the coverage of the murder in South London.
I think the sensationalist coverage of the Woolwich killing was problematic for two reasons. The first is that it overshadowed all of the other media reporting of the violent racial hate crimes that have taken place in Britain over the last 20 or 30 years. The overwhelming majority of the victims of these have been people of African, Caribbean and Asian descent. The second problem is that it gives a springboard for the government to use the press in order to legitimise its draconian policies against African, Caribbean and particularly South Asian Arabic communities as well.
What broadcasters need to be mindful of is that an act of political violence isn't just to hurt the people who are directly involved, but also to serve as propaganda and encourage others into political violence. And whilst I wouldn't want the media to be censoring, they do need to balance what they broadcast in order to avoid helping perpetrators of violence in that aim.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. In Syria, the death toll among journalists trying to cover that story continues to rise. Yara Abbas, a reporter for the state-owned Al-Ikhbariya TV, was covering fighting near the border with Lebanon when she was killed by sniper fire. Abbas was a high-profile war reporter for the state-run channel and regularly appeared alongside President Assad's forces. The government confirmed her death through this statement. The Ministry of Information announces that colleague Yara Abbas has been added to the ranks of the martyrs killed by terrorists. Terrorists is the term used by pro-Assad media when describing rebel fighters. Regardless of who journalists are aligned with in Syria, it remains a dangerous place. According to the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, 7 reporters have been killed in Syria since the start of 2013. More than 3 years after his arrest, court-martial proceedings against Bradley Manning will finally commence on Monday, June the 3rd. Alarmed by secrecy surrounding the case, journalists and press freedom activists are pushing for maximum transparency. During pre-trial hearings back in February, reporters were hampered by a ban on the public release of court documents and transcripts. So, in an effort to counter that this time around, activists from the Freedom of the Press Foundation organized a crowdfunding initiative to pay for their own stenographer to record the proceedings. The appeal has already raised more than $54,000 of its $70,000 target, so the first transcript will likely be available online from this Monday. The Pentagon is also facing a legal challenge from a group demanding better access to the trial. Plaintiffs in the case include WikiLeaks' co-founder Julian Assange, Democracy Now! Host Amy Goodman, Guardian columnist Glenn Greenwald, and the U.S. magazine The Nation. The Nation's national security correspondent Jeremy Scahill had this to say about the lack of transparency surrounding the case. The culture of extreme secrecy that has defined both the Bush and Obama presidencies does a disservice to our democratic society. By unnecessarily cloaking these proceedings from public view or scrutiny, the government is undermining the most basic principles of transparency and freedom of the press.
Come on, fire!
Bradley Manning has admitted to being the source who fed WikiLeaks the Baghdad helicopter video, the Afghan and Iraq war logs, and the diplomatic cables that made huge news throughout 2010. A blogger in Turkey has been sentenced to more than a year in jail for defending the right to say disrespectful things about the Prophet Muhammad. Charges were brought against the Turkish-Armenian blogger Sevan Nasanyan last year following the outcry over a video posted on YouTube which many Muslims found offensive. Referring to the protests, Nasanyan wrote, "Making fun of an Arab leader is not hate speech. It is an almost kindergarten-level test of what is called freedom of expression." That comment landed him a 58-week jail sentence for what Turkish law calls denigrating religious values. Nasanyan has the right to appeal and has said in an interview with a popular Armenian website that he is confident that Turkey's high court will overturn the sentence. The case is an example of increasing restrictions on freedom of expression in Turkey when it comes to religion. Last month, the court there handed pianist and composer Fazel Say a 10-month suspended jail term after he tweeted lines from the Persian poet Omar Khayyam that ridiculed the hypocrisy of religious hardliners. In 2011, Egypt's year of revolutionary change, Egypt Independent, the country's first independent English-language weekly, published its inaugural print edition. The idea behind EI was, as the paper put it, to serve as an insightful digest of the country's dynamic times. It started life online as a digital sister publication for the country's flagship independent newspaper, Al-Masri Al-Yawm. Known for challenging the country's status quo with contentious editorials, the paper blossomed during the revolution. It weathered the storms of both the interim military regime and the initial stages of the Morsi government. But EI's days were numbered. This past month, the editorial team was told the paper was being closed down. Its last edition never even made it to the newsstand. Management cited financial reasons for the closure, but the editorial staff, a questioning bunch by nature, say they have their doubts about the real cause of the shutdown. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on a day in the death of an Egyptian newspaper.
For the editor-in-chief of Egypt Independent, this was her last day in the office. Time to turn out the lights.
This is the reporter's office, the production room. On a normal day, it would be a very busy room because this is where our print edition used to be produced. But as you can see, it's completely empty now.
The Al-Masri Media Corporation, which publishes the paper, informed the editorial team the publication was being shut down for financial reasons. 2 weeks later, Lina Atalla called together the Egypt Independent staff for a final meeting. Almost all of them said they had suspicions that the motive went beyond economics.
They're explaining it as a financial thing, as we are losing a lot of money, and it's just not financially viable to keep us going the same way that we are. However, I think far better options than just shutting us down. In my opinion, that's not what it's about.
What we were hoping is that if this was purely financial reasons, a wise businessman would say, well, actually there is potential. The commercial team has failed, but the editorial team proved that they can do the job, and so let's keep this going for another at least 2 months, and maybe they can reach their target. We pushed the management to give us time to rescue the paper, and we put together a very coherent and kind of energetic, rescue plan.
This is the poster we made for the campaign. Ya Musahil is the Arabic word for here's to hope. It is a reflection of the dynamic of hope with which we've been living ever since the threat of closure was put down on the table to us. We were not only hopeful, but we were confident that this paper deserves to survive.
Instead, they just sent us a letter notifying us that Egypt Independent, the print issue, would be shut down. So it's obviously not just a financial decision.
For the past 2 years, much of the Egyptian media have walked a fine line, navigating the post-Mubarak interim military regime era and then adjusting to new media rules laid down by President Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood government. Throughout, Egypt Independent says it has refused to temper its coverage.
Don't Laugh is a pun on Morsi's attempt to silence the media by basically summoning one of the satirists in the country whose name is Bassem Youssef, and by trying to intimidate him and charge him of insulting Islam and insulting the president. And this was a response to this state attempt to silence the media, but to also silence humor, which we've all witnessed as a very strong and staunch political weapon in today's political landscape. No, not only that, I want everyone...
Lina Atalla was determined Egypt Independent should push boundaries wherever possible. She said she takes pride in the paper's long editorial pieces on controversial topics like the Muslim Brotherhood, women's rights and the security situation, expecting her reporters to not just relay the facts, but to contextualize and often take a position.
What we mean by how to tell the story is how to put it in the larger context of this revolution, and how to put it in the larger context of how the demands of this revolution remain unmet. If people are clashing with the police, we need to understand that there is a main institutional failure with regards to the reform of the security sector, for example, which is often forgotten in the reporting about these clashes. We need to always return it to the context that it belongs to, rather than just describing the rowdiness of the events as they unfold.
Egypt Independent traditionally had a little bit more freedom or ability to say things. Because it operates on the edges, it pushes the boundaries of what is acceptable to be said, or what becomes the norm, or what becomes unsayable and what becomes sayable.
It's in-depth, it's analytical, it's very nuanced, and this kind of reporting, the Arabic dailies don't have either time to do it, or they're not interested in doing it, or they don't do it well because maybe the journalists there don't get enough training, or their level of professionalism demanded from them is not the same as that is demanded for English language media.
It's a complicated balancing act in post-revolutionary Egypt, and Atalla and her team may have crossed the line. Not only was the paper closed down, but its final print edition was deemed so inflammatory by Al-Masri Al-Yum, the parent company banned the paper from going to press. The Egypt Independent team put it online anyway.
That was a flagrant act of self-censorship. The 50th edition never made it to print because it had a strong element of institutional critique, whereby we questioned the management about the decision to close Egypt Independent.
It was mostly full of an institutional critique of Al-Masri Al-Yum as an institution and what went wrong. So it's that level of objectivity and that level of freedom of expression that's kind of boundless.
Boundless says it all. For young, bright, urban Egyptians, Egypt Independent is asking the right questions. But there are some who feel the paper has gone too far. One of the harshest critics was Abdel Monim Said, managing editor of Al-Masri Al-Yum, who described the publication as a hub of leftist, activist journalism. He and others have argued that Egyptian politics is still so sensitive, new media outlets should be building bridges, not burning them.
People here are complaining that, okay, well, the media, there's no freedoms. It bows to like certain interests. It's not some media here, it's all media, and the people who cause it they don't realize the problem. To them, this is just how things are done. So before you even start to change anything, there needs to be massive, massive re-education.
Egypt Independent says it tried to be part of that re-education. For the time being, it has failed. But its editor-in-chief remains optimistic about the future of journalism in Egypt.
Our plan is to reincarnate and come back as soon as possible. The media landscape in Egypt right now is incarcerated in a binary whereby the predominant voices are those of state-run media as opposed to privately owned media. And neither of these are truly autonomous and independent media. And this is what we truly need. I would tell people not to give up, and I would tell them that there are always possibilities. They just need to be explored. Failure should always be perceived as a point of departure and not an end. So I would entice everyone to be hopeful.
More Global Village Voices now on the evolving state of journalism in Egypt.
I don't agree with the company's citation of financial reasons for the newspaper's closure. The company burned the journalist team 2 months prior print closure to solve their financial issues without any staff help. While the journalists were nearly reaching their goals and discovering great potential for financial sustainability by, for example, local and international subscriptions, the management didn't give the team any extra time or help. Egypt's press freedom and right to free expression are in great jeopardy under the Muslim Brotherhood.
The closure of Egypt Independent, the significance lay more in the fact that this was an English language newspaper with very brave editors, which consistently pushed the political boundaries in a way that the Arabic media, for whatever reason, often haven't been able to do. I'm not sure we can say yet that the closure of Egypt Independent has diminished the scope for independent media in the country, but it certainly made finding independent, reliable and trustworthy voices on Egypt that bit harder.
Finally, the American news market is a competitive place. TV execs have tried just about everything to win the ratings war: rolling news coverage, flashy graphics, belligerent talking heads. But according to singer-songwriter Austin Cunningham, Fox News has the best formula to get Americans watching. The Nashville-based country musician says it has nothing to do with the network's conservative editorial policy. He says it's not how Fox delivers the news, it's who delivers the news. It's the women. And as he says in the song, it is not as though the females on Fox are not a diverse collection. They may not really reflect the country's ethnic makeup, and their hairstyles do look remarkably similar, but they do have different hair colors. Surely they get some diversity points for that. With more than 1.1 million hits online, The Girls on Fox News is our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Well, I used to be a Democrat, liberal, no doubt. I didn't think conservatives knew what life's about. Then I started leaving the Fox News channel on. If that's the face of the right, I'll tell the left so long. Oh, I want a girl like the girls on Fox News. Everyone is beautiful, anyone you choose. Whoever does the hiring knows how to light my fuse. I want a girl like the girls on Fox News. There's Gretchen, Megan, and Martha, Harris and Patty Ann, Janice, Jenna and Julie, Maria, Anna and Allison, Dana, Ainsley, Andrea, Uma, Shannon, Molly and Heather. Hey, is there even a Heather?
Yeah.
There's two?
Yeah, two.
There's two Mollys, too?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, they make the bad news on TV look a whole lot better. 'Cause honey sure beats vinegar to wash down the news we need. No one else comes close, well, except for maybe Rob and me. They got your blondes and brunettes, even redheads too, which proves that